Okay, we are going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this call today. My name is Danny Kimball. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at O'Neill Insurance, and I am so excited to introduce you to our panel today. We hopped on a prep call earlier this week, and I could have listened to these three just talk back and forth, I think, all day long. They are experts when it comes to leadership and culture. And not to mention, for many of you who live in Northeast Ohio, they're in our backyard. They're local. They're right here. In fact, Patrick's office is just right next to mine. So it's so awesome to have access to them here. I wish we could be in person though, but we'll settle at a Zoom meeting. And before we dive in, if you have any questions at all throughout this webinar, feel free to go in the chat feature at the bottom and chat those questions in, and we will address them as they come in or towards the end of the webinar. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I promise to wrap up at 1 p.m. today. And so let's just dive right in. Let's start with some introductions. I guess for each of you, if you could share with me a little about who you are, your journey, your career journey, and at what point in that journey did you determine that culture was going to be a critical component to an organization's success? Let's start with Linda.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to be talking about culture. You know, back when I had my very first job after 8th grade working in a golf course snack bar many years ago, I may not have known the word for workplace culture, but I sure did experience a unique culture there. And since then, I've been in a lot of different kinds of work environments and cultures. High-performing cultures that were still really fun. I've been in really intense and competitive environments, especially in the legal field. I've been in environments that were relaxed and accepting. And I've also been in environments that were serious and a bit isolating. And what I know is that work gets done everywhere, but I think we all know that work doesn't feel the same way everywhere. And as an HR professional, I've seen over and over again that regardless of the particular personality of a culture in a particular workplace, when the culture is healthy and the employees feel valued, they will be incredibly loyal. They will overlook the kinds of common flaws and frustrations that can exist in any workplace. And they will really become supermen and superwomen who are motivated to leap tall buildings in a single bound for their employer. So if you can get the culture right, it can be the secret sauce that really makes a huge impact.
Love that. Bruce, what about you?
Yes, well, thank you for the invitation to join this discussion today. I look forward to learning from all of you as well. Yeah, so my career has spanned working for the government right out of college and then going into various manufacturing organizations, both large-scale multinational organizations as well as private in 3 different industries. And most recently, I have worked in and now own a contract manufacturer in the electronics space for the last 20 years. And then back in 2008, I hung up a shingle to help other organizations build their cultures and improve their leadership and internal communication. That's another business I work with called Building Trust. So culture has been a big part of what I care about personally and passionately, both what I've experienced and what I spend a lot of my time thinking about and writing on and helping with. So, but I mean, part of your question was, I think, Danny, at what point did it matter to me that like something pivoted? And I guess it would be when I was working for that large multinational organization and I just felt like a cog. And I knew I was trying really hard, but I didn't feel like the organization itself really knew what to do with me. It was all about the numbers. We were doing well as an organization, but I kind of vowed to myself that I culture intentionally that I would want to work for, that I would want to come into work for, and that everybody else around me would want to be in that kind of in a fun, challenging, with a lot of camaraderie, but also accomplish the results that we all decided we wanted to get done. So it was a long ago, but and there's been a lot of bumps and bruises and lessons learned this road, but it's been a long time, maybe 30 years ago.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So it's infectious, right? Culture is infectious.
Yes, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Patrick, what about you?
Well, thanks, Danny, and really thank you to all of you that joined us today. And we value your time, as Danny said, and we just hope that you grab a few takeaways from today and you can put them into practice. So I've been in the insurance and risk management world for about 30 years, founder of O'Neill Insurance in 1993. I think the title I'm most proud of is Chief Culture Officer. I really embrace that, and I just find that to be extremely important to really drive the culture in our company. But looking back, I think like probably every company on the webinar today, you have a very good culture. You wouldn't be here to get better. And some of you are probably even amazing, have amazing cultures, but you're always looking to get better. We had our core values, and it was always kind of important to me, but what I realized was that they just weren't really being lived out. The culture wasn't necessarily what I think, it's what the people in our organization think and how they act and behave. So my search for workplace culture really began in earnest about 7 or 8 years ago when it's kind of a defining moment, actually. There's a gentleman by the name of Mike Sipple who has an executive search firm, and we were looking for a key person. And he said, if I'm going to find the right person, I need to understand the type of organization he's coming into. So he said, I've got a couple of questions. He says, number one, how would you describe your culture? I'm like, okay, that's a good question. And he said, how would your team describe your culture? And I realized just then that I think they probably have other ideas about the culture than what I do or the leadership has. But then he said, what are the values that are lived out every single day in your company by your people? And that really stopped. I mean, we had our core values, we had them on a wall, but I realized they weren't being lived out. So what I did realize, though, is that our culture was really being influenced by some of the strongest personalities in the organization. Well, that's a good thing if they're really positive and strong individuals, but sometimes they're not. And so it was around that time that it became really clear that we've got to get a handle on this. So we're going to have a high-performing company. We need to have a really high-performing culture. So fortunate enough 5 years ago to be introduced to a gentleman by the name of David Friedman, the founder of High Performing Culture. And he wrote a book called Fundamentally Different. And that really changed everything. For me, it changed everything, how we viewed our culture, how we went about defining our culture, and about how we live that out. And today we call it the O'Neill Way, which is really a culture operating system. We've been able to really operationalize our culture over the past 5 years. And we've been practicing these fundamentals now going on 5 years. And it's changed everything about our company for the better. And not only our company, but it's had, I think, a profound impact on people's personal lives as well. Change isn't easy. It takes time, but I tell you what, it's been probably one of the most rewarding things that I have done in this company. And during that time, I also decided that in order for me to really drive culture deeper into our organization, that I wanted to become a high-performing culture consultant. So I worked with David Friedman probably for 5 years, really to drive it deep here, but also to be able to share that then with clients and prospects and others that they might be able to benefit just from what we're doing here as well.
All right, that's great. Okay, let's jump into some questions. Linda, my first question is for you. Your career path, as you shared, spans from labor and employment law to in-house HR, and now you're doing leadership development and HR consulting and incredible work in our area. We have a lot of leaders on this call today, so I'm curious, and I'm sure others are curious as well, to know what is the leader's role, or what's your perspective on the leader's role in building culture?
Well, I think it's a great question, Danny, because leaders play the most critical role in building culture, period. And I think Patrick, in describing his journey with the O'Neill Group just now, is an extraordinary example of that. There's a simple reason why the leadership role is so important in building culture, and it's because leaders are contagious. And this is neuroscience and it's biology. As human beings, we are wired for connection. We have a limbic system in our brain that is an open feedback loop that reads the energy and knows what's happening with the people around us. And we've all seen this happen so many times in a day if you pay attention to it. If you've ever watched a YouTube video of a toddler giggling and it makes you laugh yourself, that's your feedback loop working. If you've ever walked into a conference room where there's already a group of people assembled, and you know immediately when you walk into that room whether the conversation that's been going on with those folks has been light and breezy, or if it's been tense, or if it's been awkward. I mean, we just pick up on those things. And I think the best example, if anybody has ever gotten in a pretty intense argument with a partner and then gotten in a car for a long drive, we all know the difference between a silence that feels comfortable and a silence that feels threatening or really awkward, right? We've all been there. So when you apply that in a business setting, a team leader, a CEO, an executive, a manager who guides a team is going to be the most biologically contagious person in the room, because people watch that leader more closely for the clues about the spoken and unspoken rules that govern that workplace. So it's been very curious to me to watch over the length of my career that actually the organizations often start to take on the personality and the unique quirks of their primary leader. And after this webinar is over, if you guys stop and think about some of the bosses or places where you've worked and you test that theory, you might just find that it happens a lot. So a leader is building culture around him or herself every day by the way they show up, by the actions and behaviors that they exhibit, because people are watching those clues. So if you want a positive culture, obviously you need to be exhibiting positive behaviors. And some people are very intentional about that. But let's be clear, leaders who are not intentional in the same way are building culture around themselves too. They're just not being very mindful about the kind of seeds that they're planting. And they may or may not like the kind of harvest that they get, right? So let me give you just a simple example of an organization I consulted with where the leaders didn't give the kind of emphasis that Patrick described to culture. In fact, they thought it was just HR speak, soft skill stuff, touchy-feely stuff. It's like, look, we got work to do around here. We do real work here. Culture's not that big of a deal to us. They happened to have a very influential leader high up in the company who had very strong behaviors around blaming. And not surprisingly, there had grown up throughout the entire organization a culture of blame. And when people were afraid of being under this person's hot scrutiny and really piercing questions about why didn't you and why isn't this and what's gone wrong here, what happened is throughout the entire organization, people were very comfortable dodging responsibilities. There was very low accountability. And you would see this from the functioning of the executive team all the way down to the functioning of frontline employees on the plant floor. So everyone learned that leaders' behaviors very effectively. So as Patrick pointed out, you really can't be too intentional about culture. And if you can really build a positive culture, the impact will be huge.
Hmm. Yeah. Just wrapping that up, its leaders have a significant influence on their
Yes,
organization's culture, simply put, right? So,
absolutely.
Bruce, I want to take this next question to you then, kind of stemming from that leadership standpoint. Um, I've heard this time and time again. I see it playing out at O'Neill Insurance as well, that in order to build a great culture, you have to have a high level of trust among leadership and the team, right? And so I know you've studied trusting teams, team culture inside your organization, your manufacturing company, and then also with your building trust company and how you're consulting other businesses in all kinds of industries on this topic. So in your opinion, from your experience, what are the benefits of a high trust organization?
Well, as Patrick said, most of the people here on this call are on this journey of already moving forward and improving their cultures. So I think the best way to describe this is by comparing a high trust organization to a low trust organization. Um, and, you know, when I think about a high trust organization, we get the benefits of, high accountability, because we're not afraid to talk about what's really going on in the organization, because people don't take offense, because we realize that we are for each other instead of against each other. So there's accountability. Things are more predictable in a high trust organization. We're more agile. We make decisions faster because things are more open and transparent, and things are more consistent in a high trust organization. The other thing about a high trust organization is it's more human. So when we see somebody making a mistake, we kind of see their humanity, but we don't hold it against them. Whereas in a low trust organization, we see their humanity and we kind of say, "See, there they go again," and we use that negative energy. We spin that towards a cover your ass kind of a mentality, or I'm gonna keep this email because I see that they messed up. That toxic place that many organizations suffer from. And so you see in a high trust organization, you see people are committed to each other and to the organization. It just kind of feels good to be in it. The organization becomes more generous towards each other, towards the community, towards their clients. They're more people are more enthusiastic, with a lot more respect, and that's the kind of place you want to be, right?
Sure.
Yeah, and so and it would be feels like they can bring themselves to work, deal with the real tough issues, back issues get resolved, the problems get solved, and we can make more money. So on the when you have a low trust organization, there's suspicion, it's costly, things slow down, we don't share what's really going on, so there's pockets of division and isolation in the organization, higher stress level, more absenteeism. Situations don't get resolved quickly, so they kind of build their jobs because they don't ask questions. And when they don't ask questions, they kind of start to feel like those mushrooms that are only fed in the dark. It's higher risk because we're not all in the same boat helping each other out. And of course, then the results just don't show. So my experience is it's the exact opposite of those leaders who think, "Hey, we're running a business here. We don't have time for all this stuff." It's my experience is 180 degrees. Because we're running a business and we want really good results and we want to keep all these great people, let's build an environment where everybody can thrive, and then we get the results we want to.
Oh, I love that. And that's I'd say. Oh, go ahead, Linda.
Danny, if I think Bruce and our comments here are dovetailing really well, because I just want to make it so explicit. The research shows that there is a direct line correlation between positive culture employees feeling highly motivated and engaged, and high trust organizations, and concrete, tangible business results.
Mhm.
So all these things we're talking about that sound about how things feel at work and bringing your whole self to work and all that stuff, they translate into dollar and cents success for businesses.
For sure. For sure. I get to experience that as an employee of an organization that is very, very focused on culture. And I see that firsthand too. So I'm going to throw this next one to Patrick because I've personally seen the behind the scenes and been grateful to be a part of the work that you're doing to build and develop culture here at O'Neill Insurance. And I'll say it's been one of the most fulfilling components of my career, just observing and being a part of it. So let's get a little bit more practical, I guess. I think early on in your research, when you started this journey about 5 years ago and clearly defining culture, you recognized that a lot of organizations, including ours, we had a strategic plan, a business plan, a marketing plan, a financial plan, but we didn't have a culture plan, right? And a lot of organizations don't have a culture plan. And so you set out to, that's what you've really set out to accomplish and just clearly define what that culture plan looks like. And I know you've kind of morphed and changed just a little bit over the years, but can you walk us through the components of that culture plan and then also how you kind of how you see the team living that out every single day?
Sure, yeah. So just here's the good news listening to Linda and Bruce is that as leaders, we get to define the culture that we want. We get that option, and it's so powerful. And just to hear you talk about high trust and being for each other, how you can make decisions much more quickly. I think for us, it's all of this has been a progression coming out of our fundamentals and how we live our culture every single day. So to be a little more tactical about this, I would just share that we use it's an 8-step framework to create and drive the culture in our company, which we call, as I mentioned, the O'Neill way. So there's really 8 steps to it, and they're really very practical and very, very simple. One of those steps is on leadership, is about lead. If we're gonna have the culture we want, we have to lead, as Linda said. We have to be that example because people are watching us. But of the 8 steps, there's really 2 that are extremely critical in the design of our high-performing culture and in the design of our culture. And so we define the behaviors. We talk about culture in terms of behaviors that drive success versus values. And I'll make a little distinction there in a moment, but so step 1 is to define with great clarity the culture that you want as leader. We don't necessarily, this flies maybe in the face of certain conventions, but we don't take a survey. We want to know, and we could find out what kind of culture we have by doing that, but let's go to work and just building the culture we want. So if you do it with great clarity, then you get to define the behaviors that drive success. And that's what we've done. And we call them fundamentals because they're fundamental to our success. And so there's a distinction there between values and behaviors. And I didn't used to think that there was one, but there really is, because values, while they're excellent, we had 8 corporate values that hung on a wall, and heck, I didn't even know what they were, let alone letting their people know what they were. So how could we ever live those out? But they're also like, they're kind of, values are ideas, they're notions, they're kind of like nouns. They're very, very good, but how can you can't really coach or teach around those. So values like trust, respect, quality, integrity, they mean different things to different people. Respect for me, growing up the way I grew up, and respect to somebody else growing up in the South mean things completely different. So that's the first distinction. Whereas behaviors, on the other hand, are actions. They're things that you can see, you can coach, you can teach. They're observable. So we have behaviors defined, our fundamentals are really behaviors defined as things like practice, blameless problem solving. honor commitments, make quality personal, do the right thing all the time, assume positive intent, versus values of trust, respect, quality, integrity. So we got very clear on defining the behaviors that we want to live out as leaders, but also to have our organization live those out. So that was step one, define your culture in very clear terms. The step two of the 8 is really kind of the game changer. So for all of us as leaders, we know because we've gone to seminars, we've gone places, we come back with these great ideas, we put them in place and they last for about 3 months because we get super busy, things happen. We may lose a big customer, we may win a big customer, and then everything that we worked kind of goes out the window and we forget, where we were. So it's this concept called rituals. And rituals are the daily and weekly practice of the behaviors that we've defined. So a ritual, think of a ritual as something, and you know what they are because we have them in our lives. The national anthem, that's sung before every sporting event. You don't have to think about it. That's something that just happens. Prayer before dinner, that's something that many people do. They don't have to think about it. You get up every morning, you brush your teeth. These are rituals that we do. We don't have to think about it. Well, if we can then take and create rituals in our business to live out these behaviors with such consistency that they become internalized and it becomes just the way we do things around here, we don't have to think about it. And that's what we've been doing and practicing for about 5 years now. And I'll give you an example of 3 rituals that we do. They're pretty simple. We start each week with an email from a team member that shares their insights or their thoughts on our fundamental of the week. So if the fundamental of the week is be positive, they offer a few paragraphs about that. So that's a ritual we do every single Monday. It comes out from a different team member. The second ritual we do is that we start every single meeting, internal meetings, client meetings, prospect meetings, meetings with vendors, with our fundamental of the week. It's the number one agenda item. And so it reminds us, we read the fundamental and then we just share a few minutes. We don't spend a lot of time, but we just share. So it becomes ingrained and that's just how we do things. And then on Wednesday of every week, we get an email with that's a little scenario-based example of the fundamental that week with a series of 4 multiple choice answers. And so it takes about a minute to read it and answer it. It's just a way to keep it alive. So those are some of the rituals that we do. And the reason they're so important is that with this great repetition, they become internalized. And it keeps it from becoming the flavor of the month. And it works because we've been doing it for 5 years with great consistency. The team has bought into it. And it's now taken our culture and created now a culture operating system. We've operationalized it. If that's even a word. And that's how we live it out every single day in our company.
Yeah. Let's stay on this topic of behaviors. And Linda, I want to kind of throw this one to you. What are some of the, give us, I guess, specific examples of leadership behaviors that people could practice and live out that will align to building a strong, high-performing culture in their organization? How should, simply put, how should leaders show up? And what examples should they set every day?
Great question. I think the most important thing about how a leader shows up starts with self-awareness. Where am I right now? How am I feeling right now? What energy and what am I carrying into this room, into this meeting, into this workday, into my business that's going to impact the people around me? And it's sort of a gut check. Am I in a good place? Am I feeling optimistic and confident? And have I done the things I need to do to take care of myself so that I'm equipped to walk into my business today? I've seen some really amazing examples in talking to leaders over the past few months since this pandemic hit. And I want to it's been sort of synthesized into two things that I see leaders doing, behaviors I see them exhibiting in this very unusual time that I think are really helping to maintain the positive cultures that they have. They are, number one, acknowledging and understanding the unusual circumstances and the high degree of stress that people are under right now. So you just have to flat out acknowledge these are unusual and uncertain times. The second thing is I see them, and Patrick and Bruce have been describing this in every answer to their questions as well. Leaders are making tactical and practical decisions that have the needs of their employees as a very clear priority. And it's showing up in things like making sure employees have the necessary equipment if they're working from home, and making sure that whatever quick adaptations leaders have had to make in their workspaces, like plexiglass barriers in this place and taking temperatures there, that they're doing it in the most thoughtful way possible to accommodate employee needs. And we all know there's been a lot of need to communicate around these issues. I've talked to leaders who have instructed their management teams to make care calls to employees. And I think a care call is really interesting because by definition, you have to make that call when you don't have a single work-related item on your agenda. It can only be a call with a single purpose, and that's to check in and ask the team member, how are you? How's your family doing? How's working at home working for you? What do you like about working from home? And what are some aspects of the new ways you're doing your job that we might need to start incorporating into your regular work going forward, you know, not just in this unusual time. And my always favorite question for any leader to ask is looking someone straight in the eye and saying, how can I help? What do you need right now? And how can I help? And what kind of support do you need from me that I can provide? I also had an interesting call with the leader this week who said she became aware that her employees working remotely were really experiencing Zoom fatigue. Too many meetings, too much. And she actually stopped doing her Zoom care calls in the manner that she had been doing for the past several months. She modified them to an encouraging email, that sort of thing. And they actually declared a no meeting Wednesdays, which was a way to dedicate some clear space for employees where they'd say, don't schedule meetings. None of us will schedule meetings. We'll communicate by email, but we're going to try not to intrude on your time, just to create a little bit, a buffer space for people. I do have a couple of thoughts, and they're sort of pandemic related specifically. Do you want me to address them now or later?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can.
Okay. This is an aside. I know that leaders everywhere for the past 4 months have been blocking and tackling in extraordinary ways just to meet the new operational imperatives of the pandemic and responding to new regulations. So this is a word of encouragement. If you haven't taken the time yet to pause and look back and reflect over what you've done and what you have accomplished on the turn of a dime instantly over the past 4 months, I really hope after this phone call, you'll stop and sometime really reflect on all that has been accomplished. And it reminds me that as human beings, we are built to adapt. And we often talk about how change is hard. And actually, I think that's a very crippling message, because in fact, change is easy and we are built biologically to adapt. I don't think there's anyone on this phone call who is listening to their music anymore on a Sony Walkman. And I also know that if you upgraded your phone tomorrow, there'd be some adjustments and some tweaks, but 2 days from now, you'd be functioning like you'd had that phone in your hand for a month. let those stand as simple examples about how adept we are at changing and flexing. And we've really all demonstrated that in the last 4 months. And I think that should give us the confidence as leaders to say, hey, we're facing a lot of uncertainty right now, but we've changed before, we'll change again. We're going to continue to thrive, and we'll just keep chugging along and succeeding.
That's a great message. You know, I was in Target the other day, Linda, and they are still selling a Walkman. I was in like the little microphone section, and there were two of them. I'm like, I don't even know if I would know where to go get like a CD to put in that. Like, there was two of them, and I questioned. I wondered, like, how long are those there? Do they only have two in stock? Do they get more? Interesting. So there might be a couple people, but.
Well, you're too young, Danny, because if Patrick and I went to the store, we'd be looking for the CD tape to go in the Sony Walkman. But thankfully,
got it.
Thankfully, it's a lot simpler for all of us now.
Yes, definitely. No, that's great. Great message on change for sure. Patrick, let's keep it pandemic focused. I know a lot of our fundamentals that we have, there's a couple stories probably within our fundamentals as to how you kind of addressed a behavior related to the pandemic and used the language of our fundamentals to talk through this particular situation that we're all in and that our team is facing. So can you share with us maybe one or two examples of the fundamentals and how we're kind of living that out today?
Sure. So talk about having a culture plan, and this is it, actually. It's on a card. There's 30 different fundamentals, which may seem crazy, but this is our plan. It's a written plan. You can check us on it anytime if we're not living up to those, but more importantly, how we are living to those. So I just think, as I think back and reflect, and I thank God that, we run our business on EOS, which is Entrepreneurial Operating System. And also we have such a well-defined culture that it really sustained us during this time. None of us knew, as we remember when this was happening, none of us knew what this meant. And some businesses were impacted so incredibly seriously that, it was so hard. And we were probably a little more fortunate, but, we're still seeing the impact. But we all had to leave. We all had to go home and work from home. So having our culture, I just feel, and running on EOS, we didn't really skip a beat. I mean, the team jumped in, did what they had to do, and we were all home working within just a few days. So it's really allowed us to not skip a beat during this time, although there has been some very, very challenging times. One of our fundamentals is to be positive. And I'll just read it. It's be positive. We have the power to choose your attitude. Choose to be joyful, optimistic, and grateful. Remember, your attitude is contagious. Spread optimism and positive energy. And during this time, if you remember, man, there wasn't a lot of positivity going around. It was tough. People's lives were threatened. And we had to have we had to recognize that with team members, but also, have some conversations about that we're not saying, hey, you don't have to be happy, but you can choose to be joyful. You can choose to be grateful. There's something to be grateful for. And one of our team members came out with an idea. It's like, hey, why don't we write down every day this week, write something down that you're grateful for, and let's share it the following week. And that just all that flows out of our culture and the different people that are embracing it. So I had to read a lot of books, continue to reread books on how to be positive. John Gordon's a great author on that. And so just helped. And so the other thing that I did, or that came out of this, was another one of our fundamentals is to practice the human touch. And it takes me, I don't have them memorized, and we don't expect anybody to memorize them. So it just takes me a minute to find them, because I do want to read it. It says, show people you care about them as individuals rather than focusing on the transaction. Listen for and pay attention to the things that make people unique. Use handwritten notes, personal cards, gifts, and timely phone calls to acknowledge their specialness. And Linda, you kind of touched on that. Just pick up the phone and call and talk to them. Just not business related, but just in our case, it was team members reaching out to many of our clients, many of our business clients, just checking in to see how they're doing, how's their business doing. So I saw this really being lived out by our team members, and in a real way. They got on the phone. They had lots of other things to do, but they felt this was one of our fundamentals, and it was really important to reach out and touch our clients. And something else that happened for me during this time period is I started just daily, starting out writing a positive message to the leadership team. And then really that kind of morphed into writing a daily message to the entire team. And that's become a habit. And I've done it every day for the past 15 days. In fact, today was hashtag day 74, I believe. And I kind of started numbering it that way. But so that's been really just something for me to help coach and teach and maybe just share some positive ideas. Probably 20 out of the 74 have been on a positive message. Others have been just touching on our fundamentals. I have been told by the other team members when I got a little lengthy to please shorten them up. They're a lot easier to read. You don't have to write a book. So, but that goes to Bruce's point about just being, transparent, having high trust. Is people can feel free to tell me what they're thinking. We need to know. We need to, as leaders, we have to know. We have blind spots too. So, so that was it. That's just maybe how we lived out some of the fundamentals and how I see other team members embracing them.
I'll go back to when you were talking about practice the human touch. I remember multiple times you would call me on Microsoft Teams, your video would pop up, and there was one time, so I have 3 little kids at home, and I was trying to homeschool and trying to work, and I think maybe 20 days into it, he had called me, and I just started bawling on the phone. And I felt very comfortable to do that in front of Patrick, but to have the conversation to say, like, this is so hard. But, creating that, I would say more of like a vulnerability place. Like I just felt very comfortable to talk through like how I was feeling and just be open and honest about everything. And he listened, and it speaks to culture all over the board. But yeah, I remember that specific moment, and that will stand out to me, moving forward. That will stand out to me as an employee at O'Neill Insurance as like, that was really impactful. So you achieved.
I remember that, and I'm like, oh no, now what do I do?
You listened. Okay, Bruce, I want to jump back over to you because there's a number of different behaviors that correlate directly to trust, right? But one of the key elements that I'm kind of focused on is communication, especially during this time. Communication is key. So what are some communication methods that work best to building a culture of high trust?
Well, thank you for asking. And by the way, the rest of you guys are way smarter than I am. I just really appreciate the wisdom that you guys are sharing. I also, just to chime in, RBB has, the company that I have the good fortune of running, has its own set of behaviors. We call it the RBB behaviors. They're posted on our website. There's 21 of them, and we go through, because we had the same experience. The core values, as powerful as they are open to many interpretations. So instead, we say things like, we make harmony happen. So, we make very specific and we define what that is. So I applaud you for doing that, Patrick, and your team. So I encourage anyone listening to take this level. Some organizations kind of might flinch and think, oh, how can you be so specific? Isn't that kind of impinging about people to be so specific, telling us how to behave? Isn't that almost un-American? I want to encourage you that clarity is one of the best things you can provide your folks. Yep. About what it means to be a welcome, encouragement, valued member of this society, whatever that society is, and what can keep you thriving in the role, and what can actually, if you continue to violate these norms, what can usher you out of the building. Let's be specific. We actually use our behaviors as part of our ongoing performance reviews. How are folks doing against these? because if you're not holding up your end of the bargain, frankly, I don't care how good you are on your technical performance. We're not going to be able to use you long term if you're not going to keep this culture the way we've worked so hard to build it. So that's how serious we take it, those behaviors. So I just wanted to add my thoughts there.
Yeah.
So back to your question, Danny, about communication. Since the pandemic started, the challenge of ongoing communication has only gotten harder because we're not with each other. So much communication is nonverbal, and because we're not in the same physical space with each other, we're even missing more of that. So we have to be even more intentional. And I also want to just say, we aren't doing a great job. As a society, as organizations, we are not, because there's nothing that can replace those nonverbals. I say that as a teacher of trust, that there's no magic pill that we can take that will replace those nonverbals. So we have to be sensitive to that and go out of our way to go the extra mile and make sure those connections are happening as best as we can, but also not lose sight of the fact that we should be taking advantage of anything we can to, as things open up, to try to build those bridges back into a personal way as soon as possible in a safe way. Okay, let's say it, responsibly, but so that we can restore those those cultural pieces. Okay, now back to the question. I obviously am passionate and have a lot to say about this
I
stuff.
love it. It's great.
Yeah. All right, so I wrote a book. It's called the Building Trust 60-Day Workout. And there are 60 of these kind of like little, not so little ideas, but they're profound things that you could be doing one day at a time. It's kind of written as kind of almost like a meditation book. It's just a simple idea. And I'll do a shameless plug right here. It's called I don't know, it's not coming through. It's called the Building Trust 60-Day Workout. Oh God, there it is. The Building Trust 60-Day Workout. It's available on Amazon. Just look for my name. And a lot of those days are focused on different aspects of communication. So I'll just highlight a few of them here. The first one that I'll mention is what I say is called just say it. Many of us in organizations have a tendency to want to package it. We want to figure out exactly the right way to say something, or we want to find the exact moment in a conversation to drop our thought into it. Well, guess what? We aren't going to find the exact right words. And that moment, that special moment in the meeting when it's a perfect time, isn't always going to happen. And so we spend our time kicking ourselves on the car ride home or after the Zoom meeting ends, thinking, doggone it, I just missed another chance to say what was on my mind.
Right.
And so I didn't have that chance to contribute or move the organization or move the conversation in a positive place. So, my admonition to anybody here as far as trust building is concerned is just say it. Okay. And as you do that, and as others experience you doing that, it becomes a safe place for any of us just to say it. And it becomes all that vulnerability piece becomes so second nature. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is organizations have to learn to become much more direct. And when I say about going direct is go to the right person and do it as much as face-to-face as possible. Don't hide behind emails, don't hide behind texts, and don't hide behind, some organizational convenience by saying, well, I don't report to this person, so I'm not really allowed to say that to that person. No, if you've got a beef with them, or if you've got an idea, or you've got some issue, trust is built best face-to-face and direct. A third thing that I would say here on the call is ask for help. There's really nothing more you can receive as any member of the organization is if somebody else asks you for help, because you realize that they're saying, hey, I don't know everything, and I'm willing to be vulnerable with you, and you now have a chance to earn my trust by helping me accomplish something. It's so hard on us humans for some reason to ask for help. That piece. So think of how much you're doing the other person a favor by giving them the chance to give you help. So share the load, as they say. Another thing I would throw in here, many of us have this this notion that we need to be right. We've kind of earned the right to be right. And I think that's correct. We actually have earned the right to our own perspective, but so has the other person. And so it does us very little good to have arguments where somebody has to be right at the end of the conversation. And so I encourage you to let the need to be right go and focus more on what the organization needs or what the client needs. And you'll find a lot more common ground and ways to move the organization forward than to get into some kind of a competitive conversation. Another thing I'd like to throw in, I'm almost done here,
Oh, you're good.
is I like to say often to my clients and to folks within my organization is be polite, but get real. I'm all for being polite. Politeness has its place. Being rude kills mojo, kills trust environment, etc. So courtesy is important. But I think many of us, and I've worked in lots of organizations around Wayne and Holmes County, Medina County, we have a tendency to polite all over each other, okay? And where we just dance and we have this choreography where we're not really talking about what's really important. And then we fester elsewhere. And so I want to say, let's get polite, but let's get real. Let's talk about the real issue that fundamentally needs to be dealt with. And then, boy, we can cut through that tension, resolve it, get to the other side. And then, and so there's a phrase I use for that, which is called the icky place. There's a place in every conversation. Think about the ones you have with your loved ones, your kids, your spouse, whoever. And you know that you're talking at a certain level, but really you need to talk about something at a deeper level if you're really going to move this conversation or this relationship forward. If you learn to trust yourself and the other person enough to go to that icky place in a constructive way and honor the other person to allow them some mental space, right? Because this might not be the most comfortable place in the world. That will give you just a little bit of practice with that. And of course, I have courses and teachings and all that stuff to help with that. But I just want us to encourage people to go to that icky place. If you stay at that polite level, at that surface level, the organization doesn't get a chance to really deal with all the things it needs to in order to move forward. There are natural tensions in every organization that always exist. In our case, between sales and quality, sales and manufacturing, production and shipping, and all these things are always trying to, they're just naturally, they're not always dovetailed. So if we just stand around and being polite to each other, the real issues don't get resolved. That's what I mean. So those are the things I would highlight. Again, buy the book, but that's a little self-serving. So
do you have any advice? I know high courage conversations is a huge topic we talk about a lot here at O'Neill Insurance too. And like speak straight is the fundamental we have, or the behavior we have to say, go direct to the person and have the conversation. Do you have any advice as to how to enter those conversations? Because I think that's the hard part, is like the entry, and then speaking straight is fine, but entering it in a way that's respectful to the person you're talking to and to what you need to say.
Yes, I do. What I would do is I would make sure that you kind of like allow the other person the courtesy of knowing that something big is on your mind.
Yep.
Okay.
So you need to give them a little space, and actually you need some kind of a neutral, quiet setting for this conversation to take place. Don't do it in the lunchroom. Don't do it in the hallway. Give it the sacred place it needs so that you guys can have a safe place to do that. And just say, hey, Danny, there's something on my mind I really think we need to talk about, but in respect to you, do you have a few minutes to talk about something that's really important to me. Your first reaction then is going to be, wow, I wonder what's on Bruce's mind. Well, what's it about? And I'll say, well, it's about this, but my hope is that at the end of the conversation, we can be together working on a solution. We're not, but I don't know how to get there and I need your help.
Sure.
That's how I would do it.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
And Danny, quickly, as a person who's had to have in HR a lot of really tough conversations with folks about really tough subjects, I like Bruce's approach a lot. And I think the words I like to use, because I need the script to help me get into the conversation, is just, hey, Danny, I have to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. Or sometimes I even say, Danny, my heart is pounding kind of hard right now because this conversation is making me nervous. But I'm willing to push through the nerves because this is so important to me. And this is so important to us. So my heart is pounding, but we're going to do this anyway.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, we have a couple minutes left. So I want to open it up and see if anyone wants to chat any questions in. Let us know if you have any particular questions, and we'll just wait a couple minutes or a couple 30 seconds maybe to see if any questions come through. I should have had like Jeopardy music on during this time, or
You can hum, Danny. Go ahead, hum.
I'm not a good singer. I could dance. I might be able to dance. While we're waiting, if a question comes in, I'll kind of intervene here. But if you could leave one final comment, one final takeaway for this group that's on this call today, what would that be? I'll start. Bruce, let's start with you.
Well, it's been a great dialogue. So thanks, everybody. And thanks to all the participants for hanging in with us for this hour. Hope you got a lot out of it. My thought would be the cultures we have were not built virtually. So my encouragement would be, let's not be complacent. Obviously, we've had to make all the adjustments we've needed to do to get to this point and still function. But I mentioned it earlier, I'll mention it again as my final thought. Cultures are built face-to-face, personally. So keep that in mind. That's all what I would say.
Love that. Linda.
Two thoughts. Times of great disruption, like what we're in now, are times of great opportunity. So this is an exciting time to be a leader. If you're already intentional about your culture, awesome, keep up the great work. If you haven't been as intentional as you want to be, this is a perfect time to start. And who you are is how you lead. And I can't think of a better time for leaders to double down on their level of self-care and self-awareness and really be mindful and intentional about how they show up every day.
Great. Patrick.
Thank you again to everybody, and Linda and Bruce. I was taking notes as you were speaking. They were so good. I think it's pretty obvious to everybody listening that the environment, the culture inside any organization has an enormous influence on how people show up and do their work. And so knowing that, why would we ever want to leave that to chance and just have any kind of culture? You've heard the words intentionality around it. This is the opportunity, because it just makes sense to have the kind of culture that enable your people to perform at their highest level. Wherever you are in the culture journey, this is an opportunity, I think, to strengthen it, to look ahead, to define the culture you want to have in your organization. And so I would just say, if you're interested, please reach out to any of us. We can help you if you'd like. The way we've built the fundamentals now, it's been turned into a system that is extremely, extremely affordable for any organization. And it's amazing. It's called CultureWise. And it's just, David Friedman has taken this whole thing on culture and made it into a product, which is like amazing in itself. But that's something that's available. And I'm telling you what, it's really, really inexpensive. But let's end with this and saying that, good companies have good cultures by chance. world-class companies have world-class cultures by design. And if we're going to be world-class, doesn't matter the size of your company, we need to have world-class cultures.
Well said.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for spending the time with us today to talk all things culture. I absolutely loved it. I'm excited to rewatch the recording and take some notes. And thank you to our guests who joined us on this call. I hope it was incredibly valuable. I know it was for me personally, so I hope it was valuable for you as well. And you will receive follow-up information. I'm 1 minute over time. I promised you 1 o'clock, but you'll receive an email from me with all the details. Thanks again so much. And everyone have a great afternoon.